Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. Our goal today is to provide an introduction to and a high-level overview of MeHI's new EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit. The toolkit can be found on the MeHI website, mehi.masstech.org. We will also make an audio recording of the presentation available on the website. This toolkit was drafted after comprehensive research that examined best practices and looked at available tools nationwide. However, it has not been field tested with Massachusetts providers. MeHI strongly encourages your feedback and invites you to use this form to submit your comments and suggestions or to ask questions about the toolkit and the collateral materials within it. MeHI may consider future updates to the toolkit to reflect refinements based on provider and other stakeholder input, as well as the changing federal and state regulatory and technology environment. In today's webinar, we will present a very brief overview of the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative and MeHI, the Massachusetts eHealth Initiative. We will then review the individual components and requirements of this EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit, including an examination of each of the four important phases: pre-solicitation and preparation, vendor solicitation, vendor evaluation and selection, and vendor relationship management. We will briefly touch on some important federal, state, and setting-specific requirements, and note that although this toolkit is designed primarily for organizations that have not yet adopted an EHR system, it may also be useful to organizations that are in the midst of the procurement process or that are contemplating changing systems. My name is Judith Iwanski. I'm the manager of the MeHI's eHealth eQuality program and your host for this webinar. Also with me today is Olivia Joplin, eHealth programs coordinator for MeHI. If there is time at the end, we may answer questions submitted during this presentation. However, as stated previously, we encourage you to submit your comments and questions in the form provided at the website. Note that the hyperlinks in this webinar are not accessible to click on during the presentation. They will be active when we post the slide deck. The information contained in this toolkit is for general information purposes only. The suggested practices contained within the toolkit are recommendations only and in no way should be construed as a substitute for professional or legal counsel or regulatory established standards as related to planning, adoption, and implementation of an EHR or other health IT. In this toolkit, links to other websites or resources are included as a courtesy. Thus, they are not under the control of the EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit. MeHI has no control over the nature, content, and availability of those websites or resources. The inclusion of any links does not necessarily imply a recommendation or endorsement of the views expressed within them. The documents constituting the toolkit do not substitute for Massachusetts-specific regulations or program requirements and may not apply to a particular situation based on the circumstances. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the MassTech overview. Please refer to our website if you'd like additional information. In brief, the Mass Technology Collaborative is a public economic development agency established pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40J. It is an independent authority of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Massachusetts eHealth Institute, or MeHI, is a non-divisible component of MassTech and functions as one of its business divisions. MeHI is dedicated to the advancement of healthcare through the use of technology. It is the designated state agency for coordinating healthcare innovation, technology, and competitiveness, accelerating the adoption of health information technologies, promoting health IT to improve the safety, quality, and efficiency of healthcare in Massachusetts, and advancing the dissemination of interoperable electronic health record systems in all healthcare provider settings that are networked through a statewide health information exchange, the Mass Highway. This slide shows the high-level vision, mission, and goals of MeHI, including supporting the triple aim of health reform: better population health, improved patient care, and lower costs of health care. MeHI provides eHealth assistance for programs, services, collaboration, education, and funding. At a high level, MeHI currently has 4 major initiatives: the eHealth eQuality Program, the Connected Communities Program, Health Services and Support, and eHealth Cluster Development. The EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit was developed as part of the eHealth eQuality Program. The planning and procurement process is essential to the success of EHR implementation. We believe that using the practices recommended in this toolkit will increase the likelihood you will successfully implement an interoperable EHR that will address the specific needs of your organization. This EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit consists of recommended action steps for Massachusetts healthcare providers to begin the planning and procurement process for the adoption of EHRs. It is organized by the 4 major phases of the EHR planning and procurement process. Each phase of the toolkit provides an overview of the basic steps as well as links to tools and resources that will help you with each phase of the process. A link to relevant federal and state statutes and a glossary are also included. The toolkit has been developed particularly to help small and resource-constrained providers. These resources may be particularly beneficial for behavioral health and long-term and post-acute care providers. The toolkit aggregates materials, most of which have been field tested by regional extension centers, into a convenient location where providers can quickly access useful information about EHR planning and procurement and learn helpful tips on navigating the EHR planning and procurement process while implementing recommended practices. Benefits of using the toolkit include reducing time spent doing research and looking for tools, providing useful information on how to navigate the EHR planning and procurement process, providing helpful tips on where to find funding to support EHR adoption, and it consolidates common tools into one place for reference based on best practices. This toolkit provides recommendations on the best practices to procure an EHR. We do understand that small or resource-constrained organizations may not have the resources to be able to spend time that is necessary to perform all of the steps in it. However, we do recommend that every organization review all of the information in the toolkit to determine the feasibility and priority of each step. This toolkit focuses only on strategies and actions taken to plan and procure an EHR, essential first steps for a successful EHR implementation. It's important to note that the toolkit does not include subsequent steps, such as the implementation process and the associated tasks of system building and configuration, testing, training, or go-live activities, nor tasks associated with system maintenance and support. Planning and procurement of EHRs is a process that requires commitment of time and resources. You want to ensure that you select the right vendor and the right product to meet the needs of your organization. This includes procuring a certified EHR technology, or CERT. The Office of the National Coordinator, or the ONC, Certified Health IT Product List, referred to as CHAPL, identifies those EHR systems that are certified. While the adoption of a certified EHR system or product does not guarantee interoperability, certification does help ensure that the EHR that you procure provides standard-based functionality that will support interoperability. Before moving forward, be sure to plan on spending the time to complete all 4 phases. Factors that may impact the time required include the level of your organization's preparation, time needed to write requirements, and the time needed by vendors to compose a response, as well as the time needed to negotiate contracts. These factors will vary based on the complexity of the software system needed and the size of the project. Each phase of the toolkit includes a series of steps to follow, accompanied by references to resources and actionable tools that are highlighted by orange circles throughout the toolkit. These include collateral materials such as checklists, templates, and spreadsheets that you can use and adapt to help collect information and plan for your EHR procurement. In addition, each phase and corresponding list of steps provides hyperlinks that offer additional information and resources about the included topic or area. In this next portion of the webinar, we'll walk through the 4 important phases in the EHR planning and procurement process. Phase 1, the pre-solicitation and preparation phase, is where an organization assesses and plans for its needs. Phase 2, vendor solicitation, is where the organization will solicit and evaluate EHR vendor products. Phase 3, vendor evaluation and selection, is where the organization will select and contract with an EHR vendor. Phase 4, vendor relationship management, is where the toolkit discusses managing that vendor relationship going forward. In Phase 1, pre-solicitation and preparation, it is critical that the organization invest the time to understand its goals, its needs, and its finances. What you discover will help serve as your roadmap for soliciting vendors and procuring an appropriate EHR system. Successful adoption of interoperable EHR technology enabled to securely exchange data with other providers and systems requires a strong level of organizational commitment and knowledge about how to complete key steps during the pre-solicitation and planning phase. It is important to identify a leadership team to gather information and solicit feedback from decision makers and potential users, perform research and analysis, and to coordinate the pre-solicitation effort. Your leadership team could include individuals with the following roles: an executive member that has the authority to make final decisions, a clinical champion who can facilitate clinician, quote, buy-in, end quote, and an EHR project manager with the responsibility for coordinating tasks. Smaller practices may not have separate individuals in each of these roles. However, these functions should be delegated to an individual or to a consultant to ensure a successful EHR procurement process. Phase 1, pre-solicitation and preparation, consists of 6 steps. Each of these is examined in detail in the toolkit. Here we will present just a brief overview over the next few slides. Step 1 is to assess organizational readiness. The readiness assessment is the process of measuring how prepared the organization is for a major change. In assessing your readiness, you evaluate how your organization's culture is likely to adapt to an electronic environment, what levels of support you can expect from leaders and from frontline staff, areas where your existing operational policies and procedures will need to change, and whether your organization has a technical aptitude. You will also evaluate your resources for meeting these changes and consider how to obtain additional resources to support the change process. The goal is to identify barriers and to address issues before beginning the process of procuring the technology. When assessing your organization's readiness to procure an EHR, there are key questions that need to be explored. The toolkit contains a practice assessment for EHR selection and implementation tool that will help develop assessment questions and start the evaluation of your organization's readiness to go through each of the remaining phases of the procurement process. The Creating a Leadership Team for Successful EHR Implementation tool provides a listing of key staff that are recommended to be involved in the process. Some of the types of staff may not be an exact match to your organization. However, the roles and functions are likely to be the responsibility of at least some of your staff. The intent is to provide examples to help you get started and think through all of the functions that are performed at your organization on a daily basis that will be impacted by EHR implementation. Step 2, assess organizational financial resources. Making a major investment in an EHR is challenging and has been one of the most significant barriers to adoption for small providers and for those not eligible for federal EHR incentive programs. The toolkit provides guidance on financing strategies that help identify where other organizations have found funding. for example, state or federal grants and philanthropy, and financing options such as group purchasing and bank loans. The level of resources required for EHR acquisition and implementation will depend on the scope of the project and on the choices the organization makes during the planning and product vendor selection. Continue to revisit your financing decisions as you plan and implement your EHR. The Toolkit provides a financing resource tool that will help as you consider financing options for procurement. Step 3 is create a budget. The cost of the EHR system involves much more than just the actual software license and installation costs. In this step, the Toolkit discusses the cost components of a vendor's budget to ensure that you capture and plan for all costs that are associated with an EHR acquisition. Major cost components may include the EHR system and license fees, interfaces and health information exchange costs, computing hardware, such as ancillary devices and equipment like printers and scanners, network and communication costs, including network and internet service providers or ISP fees, and vendor services costs, such as for training, implementation, and system upgrades. These are costs directly associated with the acquisition of a product, or, in another word, hard costs. There are also intangible or indirect or soft costs to consider, such as legal costs, workflow assessment or efficiency studies, privacy and security training, risk assessments, and policy updates, as well as staff time. The Toolkit also examines, should we use the EHR system provided by our administrative vendor, for example, the billing vendor or schedule system, or should we purchase a specialty-specific system or purchase a generic system with modules for our specialty? Or should we choose a cloud-based system or a locally hosted server-based system? The function of the budget tool is to help your organization become familiar with all of the potential costs typically associated with EHR procurement and to help identify the key areas to explore with vendors during the evaluation and selection phase. The fourth step is to create a communication plan. A good communication plan will keep all decision makers and all potential users of the EHR engaged in the transition and will manage the uncertainty of change. There are also a number of other constituents that will benefit from learning about your organization's transition to an EHR. This includes your other vendors, patients, caregivers, and the community in which you practice. The communication tool includes a sample table and communication plan to assist in outlining the key messages, defining the target audience, the timing and delivery mechanism for each message. The tool helps to develop and adapt a communication plan that is tailored for your organization. Step 5 is to develop a data conversion and chart migration plan. This step will help answer the question, how do we transfer the entire content of those paper charts to the EHR? By guiding you through developing a plan for data conversion and/or migration. This chart migration is a critical EHR adoption step, as it ensures that patient data will be available in the EHR when you do go live. A solid chart migration strategy decreases the risk of lost productivity and helps to avoid patient safety issues that could emerge when key patient data is not available. Whether your organization is completely paper-based, quasi-paperless, or already using an EHR, you will need to determine how to deal with the records in their current form and how to incorporate them into the new system. The chart migration and scanning checklist, this tool, provides a list of key questions and also a template that will help your organization prioritize your chart migration needs. It also outlines chart migration options, which may include keeping paper records and archiving, scanning paper records, and electronically archiving or scanning paper records into the EHR. Step 6 is to conduct a workflow analysis and process redesign. Acquisition of an EHR system will impact existing workflows, and your organization must assess and plan for the change. First, must assess the current or as-is state by assigning a team member to observe and collect information about existing work tasks and processes, and then consider what changes will be required. The Workflow and Process Redesign tool creates a process map or diagram for workflow and process redesign and provides examples of how to create maps outlining the processes by which staff perform their jobs. It is likely that staff members may experience some change in their workflow or job function as a result of integrating the EHR into the workflow. For that reason, it's critical to have key staff participate in the EHR planning and procurement process in order to determine the workflow processes that need to be modified to optimize the value of the EHR. Phase 2 is the vendor solicitation process. This builds on what was learned during the pre-solicitation phase. In this phase, you will outline your organization's needs or requirements and invite vendors to explain how their systems will meet your requirements. Most organizations use a request for proposals, or an RFP, to standardize information received and allow you to objectively compare vendors. An RFP can be as short as 3 pages or much longer, 10+ pages. That's typically for a larger organization. MeHI recognizes that a resource-constrained organization may not have the resources to perform all steps. However, it is recommended that every organization focus on certain components and gather at least the following information from 2 to 3 vendors. One is a vendor profile, which describes their company, product, and service offerings, and their organizational stability. 2 are specifications, which cover the basic functions you need in an EHR system, such as order entry and documentation. Next is an implementation plan, which includes a basic implementation plan with estimated timeline. Next is a hardware and configuration specification, which provides a list of hardware requirements and your configuration options, client server, SAS, etc. Finally is the cost estimate, including detailed costs for each item. Step 1, write a request for proposals. An RFP typically has several parts. Part 1 is the introduction and goals, that is, the goals and objectives of your EHR acquisition. Part 2 is your organizational background, a brief highlight of your organization, including your facility size, workforce, services provided, technical infrastructure, and other initiatives that may impact EHR adoption. This section also identifies the specific sector, for example, behavioral health or long-term post-acute care, and those sector requirements that the vendor's products must address. Plus, there are other relevant factors, for example, privacy and security requirements, EHR system compatibility with major partners and referral sources, regulatory reporting requirements, and interfaces such as with the Massachusetts Mass Highway. Part 3 is the vendor profile and RFP and required information. This section provides the details on how a vendor needs to respond to the RFP, including the due date and mailing address. Request a clearly written vendor response covering information about their organization history and product details, including specifications required to install, implement, and support the EHR system. The request from the vendor should include, at a minimum, the following: a vendor profile that includes pricing of products and services, specifications of the system, the implementation plan, and a cost estimate. The more detailed the questions are, the more likely the vendors can provide a complete response for your review. Standardized questions allow your organization to objectively evaluate multiple vendors. The Request for Proposals template for Health Information Technology tool is a comprehensive guide to help organizations identify those factors in an EHR that are important to your organization. Step 2 is to identify EHR vendors for the solicitation. You should select your top vendors by developing a screening process using a set of your minimum criteria, such as the type of software solution. Is it cloud-based or locally hosted? Integration with other systems, for example, an administrative or other clinical system. The documentation capture processes. Preparedness for federal billing and coding changes. Health information exchange capabilities, such as compatibility with the Mass Highway. We recommend using the Certified Health IT Product List, or CHAPL, website to find vendors with interoperable products. Use the exact spelling when searching for the product name. If it's not on CHAPL, it is not a certified EHR. You can either eliminate the product from the short list or ask the vendor to point you to its location on the CHAPL website. Step 3 is distribute the RFP and collect proposals. Invite the identified vendors to respond to the RFP. Include details about the desired format and length of the response, and have standardized responses to make it easier to compare products side by side. You might assign one person from the organization to collect the proposals and coordinate the evaluation team. Once all vendor responses have been collected and organized, you are ready to move to the next phase of the process. In phase 3, vendor evaluation and selection, your organization will assemble an evaluation team with the purpose of scoring the vendor's RFP responses. Invite a wide range of internal stakeholders, including those who will be using the EHR product on a daily basis, to be part of the selection process. At the end of the phase, the team will select the EHR vendor and/or product. In phase 3, the organization gathers proposals from vendors that respond to the RFP, evaluates responses, and performs additional research about each vendor, then narrows to select a few vendors, and negotiates and contracts with the final selected vendor. In step 1, you perform due diligence. The due diligence process ensures that your organization has a consistent and reasonable approach to vetting the EHR vendor finalists. The organization should participate in product demonstrations and conduct reference checks. The team should be prepared to ask questions and discuss options with the vendor representatives. And then the toolkit previews important questions when checking references, including what kind of technical support did you get when installing the system at your location? How much time did it take to customize the system? Who did the customization? Was the vendor sensitive to your lost productivity concerns? How did they help you manage it? Were you aware of all the interfaces you needed? How did the vendor help you keep current on regulatory and compliance systems? Use the reference checking worksheet for EHR vendor tool when checking EHR vendor references. Step 2 is scoring the proposals. Once the proposals are received from the vendors, your organization will need to compare and score responses. Based on the RFP outline and the requirements that you identified as most important, you can use a vendor evaluation matrix to organize and score the information you received. Each vendor is then evaluated based on a set of criteria that were defined in the RFP. Your organization should have a standard scoring method or scorecard. The vendor evaluation matrix tool provided as a starting point or a template to help organize your organization's requirements into a standardized format to quickly evaluate your vendor choices. While some of the evaluation metrics may be relevant or useful, it is important that your organization spend time updating the vendor evaluation matrix based on the RFP that the vendors responded to. On-site visits are a great way to see how other colleagues in healthcare organizations use the vendor software product in a live patient setting. we recommend that you visit a site that is using one of the EHR products that has made the final selection list to get a better feel for how the product is used in other organizations. Your vendor finalist will provide a list of organizations that are willing to host a site visit. Your organization's key decision makers should be able to narrow the selection down to 1 or 2 EHR vendors after evaluating the RFPs and completing at least one visit. You should include the following steps in the final selection process. Gather the organization's decision makers and review the scores. Discuss additional considerations and gather any additional questions for the vendor. Compare the request you made in your RFP with vendor responses. Contact the vendor finalist with any questions or concerns. Review additional information with the selection team. Then select the top vendor and consider selecting a runner-up as a contingency. Finally, enter into contract negotiations and consider having legal representation. You may want to reuse the vendor evaluation matrix tool as a guideline for narrowing down the selection to 1 or 2 finalists. Step 4 is negotiate the vendor contract. Vendors typically have their own contract, but keep in mind that the vendor's contract was developed by the EHR vendor's legal team with the intent of protecting the vendor. Most terms in the vendor contract are negotiable. You may want to consider securing the services of a health law attorney with knowledge of your specialty to account for specific contract terms and conditions you may not have anticipated. The vendor contract will set expectations about the EHR vendor relationship. It is important to establish a shared understanding of the contract terms and conditions and navigate the negotiation process for mutual benefit. Development of a vendor contract involves 2 key activities: understanding the EHR contract terms and navigating the negotiation process. Prior to negotiating a contract, take the time to fully understand each contract element and its impact, not only on the purchase of the product, but also on the installation, implementation, utilization, maintenance, and support of the product as well. Once you have selected your preferred vendor and have an understanding of the contract terms, you are now ready to begin the contract and negotiation process. You will want to cover various aspects related to EHR adoption, including payment and fee structures, software functionality, hardware and system infrastructure, maintenance and support, interfaces, training, and implementation. The contracting guidelines and checklist for EHR vendor selection tool will help ensure that your organization reviews specific contract clauses and items and incorporates them prior to contract execution. Vendor relationship management begins during contract negotiations and continues through implementation and continued use. The contract serves as the blueprint for the vendor relationship and sets expectations for customer service. It is important to identify roles and responsibilities beyond the terms of the contract to establish procedures and processes for issue resolution and managing EHR system updates, upgrades, and add-ons. The steps in this last phase are critical to ensure a successful EHR implementation and having a working relationship with your vendor. In this phase, the healthcare organization develops procedures that are supportive of a long-term collaborative relationship with the contracted vendor and identifies expectations of the organization and the vendor regarding product use and service. In step 1, designate a primary point of contact from your organization who will manage the relationship with the vendor. Your organization should identify and designate a key point of contact to manage the vendor relationship. This person needs to have an understanding of the terms of the contract and your organization's operations and technical capabilities in order to serve as a liaison with the vendor and help address EHR system problems. This person will be responsible for working with the vendor account manager, as well as the vendor help desk support, to manage issues and guide testing of product updates, upgrades, and add-ons prior to go live. Step 2, ensure the vendor identifies a primary contact who is also familiar with the contract terms, as well as with your organization's needs and technical infrastructure. This person will be responsible for working with the primary contact from your organization to determine the need for additional vendor products, such as adding on new modules, updates, fixing known bugs or product issues, or upgrades, increasing functionality. This individual should also be the contact if you encounter problems that have not been resolved by the vendor's help desk support. Step 3, establish process for issue documentation and resolution before, during, and after implementation. Your organization should ensure that there is a process for documenting and resolving issues that arise. An agreed-upon process for submitting and addressing each issue should be established with your EHR vendor, including the time frame within which an issue will be resolved, disposition milestones, and an understanding of liability and costs associated with each issue. A case log will help your organization maintain consistent documentation and allow for tracking of incidences that may occur before, during, and post implementation of the system. The log will help you track various topics, including the 3 most common. A problem. Problem encountered during the system that cannot be solved is the disrupted use of the system and requires intervention by the vendor. An enhancement. This is a non-urgent request, typically asking the vendor to program the system with added functionality or for the software to perform functions of a different manner. And a question. This is a non-urgent inquiry made to the vendor to clarify use of the system, explain system functions, or other questions related to the use of the vendor product. Step 4, establish process for managing system updates, upgrades, and add-ons after the installation. Your software license will require your EHR vendor to regularly update or fix software bugs and provide you with upgrades as regulatory, technology, and clinical discoveries continue to emerge. Most updates occur on a regular basis and will not affect your organization's workflow. Upgrades are major software fixes or updates to accommodate client requests or regulatory features. Add-ons are additional products or modules purchased to increase system functionality. Updates, upgrades, and add-ons can be disruptive. However, this can be greatly reduced with proper planning and an established approach, including assessing the benefits for the changes, what is the vendor's approach to demonstrating the upgrade, what are vendor plans for the upgrade, and scheduling a go-live date. The software management checklist can be used to standardize your organization's processes when dealing with updates, upgrades, and add-ons. EHR planning and procurement is a complex process, requires thoughtful assessment and thorough planning. Commitment of staff resources and time is key to ensure that all phases are explored and due diligence uncovers both anticipated and unexpected outcomes. The initial EHR implementation may be a short-term project. However, the decisions made during the planning and procurement phases will have long-term impact in all aspects of your organization's business and clinical operations. Selecting the right vendor is important to make sure that your investment dollars will lead to long-term success, not only of the EHR implementation, but also for your organization's continued operations. The data collected in and information produced from an EHR system are invaluable assets. And every effort should be made to find a vendor that has the experience, products, and services to handle these resources. To increase the likelihood that your EHR planning and procurement is thorough and that the EHR implementation is a success, you should ensure that your organization prioritizes the EHR planning and procurement process as part of normal staff job responsibilities. Assigns responsibility to internal staff, external staff such as consultants, or both, who are held accountable for the process. Outsource planning activities, for example, contract review or information technology assessment when organizational time or resources are limited. Contact other colleagues, local facilities, and healthcare organizations that have implemented EHRs to seek insight when resources are limited. Assume that the EHR planning and procurement process will be a long-term, continuous cycle, even after the initial EHR installation. As an organizational needs change, your vendor products are updated. The next few slides illustrate some of the many other federal and state and sector-specific considerations healthcare providers need to consider when planning and procuring health IT. Links to most of these can be found in Appendix A of the Toolkit. We will not go through these in detail, but this slide illustrates some of the many federal requirements that healthcare providers need to consider. Again, this slide gives examples of some of the Massachusetts requirements that providers need to consider. And as an example, there are sector-specific requirements to consider. This slide shows some of those that are important for behavioral health and long-term post-acute care providers. The EHR Planning and Procurement Toolkit is available for download on the MeHI website, shown on your screen. As I stated at the beginning, we strongly encourage your feedback and invite you to submit your comments and suggestions or ask questions using the form at the address provided on the screen. Thank you for attending the webinar. Olivia, we have a little bit of time. Are there any questions?
Yes. Our first question is, will there be a simplified toolkit developed for solo or very small group behavioral health practices?
At this time, we do not contemplate developing another toolkit. We have pointed out in this toolkit where a small provider can abbreviate a process and which parts are critical, and for behavioral health, which other considerations need to be contemplated. But I would encourage you, if there's a piece that you think is either missing from this toolkit or needs to be simplified, to please fill out the form and let us know. We do contemplate updates as we get feedback.
Our second question, to the best of your knowledge, are there any vendors who are ready, able, and willing to contract with solo or very small behavioral health groups?
I'm sort of beyond the scope of this as far as a state agency. We don't endorse or recommend one vendor or another.
Will these slides be made available to attendees?
They'll be available on the website, as will, you can download the slides or the audio recording of this webinar.
Great. And one of our final questions, is there a different toolkit for a provider in the process of changing vendors?
No, we think this toolkit is applicable to both organizations that are looking to purchase an EHR for the first time, or for those changing or contemplating changing EHR products or systems, you perhaps would benefit from going back and doing some of the original pre-solicitation assessments to see why the product that you have may no longer fit your needs. But again, we believe it fits for both groups, but if there's something in there that you think it would be helpful or that's missing, please let us know in the form on the website. Thank you all for your attendance.